Hey there! If you've played any video games lately, any AAA titles, you've probably noticed that they're riddled with choices. Video game developers have taken on this idea to make choices part of video games, and they stack the different endings depending on which choice you get, or different characters in the game you get depending on the choices that you make. I was recently playing a game called Triangle Strategy, and at the end of it you have 3 different choices to make, and it will sort of make or break your ending, and the characters that you have in your game will leave you in moral opposition depending on which choice you make of which ending you want to pick. And that means that the other endings and the other characters are kind of locked out at that point. Big decisions usually mean sacrifice. God calls Moses and the Jews that are enslaved by Pharaoh to make a huge sacrifice. Life wasn't great being enslaved by Pharaoh, but they had a place to be, they had just enough food to eat and to survive, and maybe some relative safety under Pharaoh's care. And then God calls up Moses one day and says, "Hey, time for y'all to get out of Dodge." And it wasn't like God's pointing to the Hilton there and saying, "Go that way and it's all going to be great. You just got to make it over there and you'll be fine." God's literally leading them out into the wide open desert. Now, of course, once they're free, they find themselves with no food, no water, no shelter, no safety. Natural assumption is that Moses and God have actually led them all out to die, right? There doesn't seem to be any plan for their care and well-being. All this sacrifice for starvation and dehydration. Now, maybe during this season of Lent, you're feeling like you're being called to sacrifice something. I mean, if you want anything bad enough, hard enough, you'll sacrifice for it, right? Any sports player, that this is a fact, right? You have to sacrifice something in order to gain that skill. So if you want to be a professional basketball player, for example, you'll have to sacrifice long hours and years practicing that craft in order to get that skill. Giving up that time to one thing means that you're sacrificing something else. By doing one thing, it naturally means that you cannot do another. Sacrifice requires faith. The Jews, led by Moses, sacrificed food and security and water and shelter to make the trip out into the desert, and there was no going back, but they were sacrificing to make something better, right? They wanted a better life, better than enslavement, better than work unto death. And so God eventually shows up to relieve their fears. He causes water to come from a rock, right? Moses strikes the rock and water pours forth from it to relieve their fears. And they're never given the same things that they had in Egypt, right? They can't have their cake and eat it too. The sacrifice that they have made, the choice that they have made, what to sacrifice, is something that has to go and continue on, and it has its own reward. And they're eventually led into the promised land. Whatever you're being called to sacrifice may seem like a lot. It may mean that you're giving up a lot of things. It may seem like it's really heavy and really burdensome. Maybe it's a new diet so you can be healthier. Maybe it's time so that you can save up. You're working all the time so you can save up money for something. Whatever it is, know that God can make that sacrifice into something really life-giving and life-changing. And it is definitely worth the sacrifice. Blessings to you in your Lenten journey.